secret of the whispering Halloween tree. The village of Evermoor was a quiet place, nestled deep within the rolling hills and surrounded on all sides by thick, ancient forests. It was the kind of place where time seemed to flow slower, where the rhythms of life were dictated by the turning of the seasons and the whisper of the wind through the trees. The houses, with their thatched roofs and ivy-covered walls, lined narrow, cobbled streets that twisted and turned like a forgotten labyrinth. In the day, the village bustled softly with the sounds of daily chores, the creak of wooden carts, the clatter of hooves, and the low murmur of conversations. But at night, Evermoor grew silent, as if holding its breath, listening. Halloween night in Evermoor was unlike anywhere else. There were no noisy celebrations or lively gatherings, no carved pumpkins or costumed children running through the streets. Instead, the villagers stayed indoors, lighting candles in their windows and speaking in hushed tones. They knew that on this night, the barrier between worlds grew thin, and the spirits of the forest roamed free. It was a time for quiet reflection, a time to honor the unseen forces that shaped their lives. And at the edge of the village, standing tall and solitary against the darkening sky, was the enchanted willow. The tree towered over the landscape, its long, twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers against the backdrop of the twilight. It was ancient, older than the village itself, older even than the oldest stories told around the hearths on cold winter nights. Its trunk, thick and gnarled, was covered in a dense layer of moss and lichen, giving it the appearance of something half alive, half dreamed. The roots coiled and twisted around the base like serpents, disappearing into the soft, damp earth. But what made the tree truly remarkable was its voice. On nights when the air was still and the moon was high, it was said that the willow would whisper. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, like the sigh of the wind through the leaves, or the murmur of a stream flowing over stones. But to those who listened closely, it became clear. The tree spoke, its voice filled with the wisdom of ages, carrying secrets and stories that had been long forgotten. Rowan, a quiet scholar who had made the village her home, often found herself drawn to the tree. She would stand at the edge of the clearing, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, listening to the faint rustling of the willow's branches. There was something about the tree that called to her, a pull that she couldn't quite explain, a yearning that tugged at the edges of her thoughts whenever she looked at it. Tonight, however, felt different. The air was colder, sharper, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. The moon, pale and luminous, hung low in the sky, casting long, silvery shadows across the clearing. And as Rowan approached the willow, she could feel it, a faint hum in the air, a soft vibration that seemed to resonate deep within her chest. She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the twisted branches above. The tree loomed before her, its presence almost overwhelming, and she could see the way its limbs trembled slightly, as if caught in an invisible breeze. The whispers were there, just at the edge of her awareness, a soft, beckoning sound, like the rustling of pages in a long-forgotten book. Rowan took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She had heard the stories, the tales of the tree's voice, the secrets it held for those willing to listen. But she had never imagined that she would hear it herself. And yet, As she stood there, alone in the stillness of the night, the whispers grew clearer. They called her name. The whispers were faint at first, barely audible over the soft rustling of the leaves. But as Rowan stood there, her eyes fixed on the shadowed outline of the willow's branches, the sound grew stronger, clearer. It was like a distant murmur, carried on the breeze, winding its way through the tangled branches and coiling around her ears. She strained to catch the words, leaning closer, her heart fluttering with a mixture of fear and wonder. Rowan. Rowan. The sound of her name sent a shiver down her spine. She glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but the clearing was empty. Only the willow stood before her, its branches swaying gently as if moved by an unseen hand. She took a hesitant step forward, her gaze locked on the gnarled trunk, the way it seemed to pulse faintly in the moonlight. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and she could feel them vibrating through her bones, tugging her forward. It was as if the tree was calling her, guiding her. Swallowing her nerves, Rowan stepped closer, her boots crunching softly on the frost-covered grass. She reached out a tentative hand, brushing her fingers against the rough bark. It felt cold and smooth, the texture like polished stone beneath her touch. And then, just as her fingertips grazed the surface, the whispers shifted. Follow. The word was clear, echoing through her mind like the tolling of a distant bell. Rowan gasped, stumbling back a step. Her heart was racing, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Had she imagined it? Was it truly the tree speaking, or was it just her mind playing tricks on her? But no, there was no mistaking it. The whisper was real as the chill in the air, as real as the soft glow of the moon overhead. She could feel it, something ancient and powerful, pulsing just beneath the surface of the bark. And it was calling to her. Gathering her courage, Rowan took a deep breath and stepped around the base of the willow. The moonlight cast long shadows across the ground, the twisted roots creating a tangled web of darkness and light. As she moved, her foot caught on something half buried in the earth, and she nearly stumbled. Frowning, she crouched down, brushing away the layer of fallen leaves and dirt. There, nestled between the thick, coiled roots of the willow, was a small opening, just wide enough for her to slip through. The entrance was hidden from view, obscured by a curtain of moss and ivy that hung like a veil over the narrow gap. Rowan leaned closer, peering into the darkness beyond. A faint glow emanated from within, a soft, pulsing light that seemed to beckon her forward. The whispers were stronger now, filling her ears, urging her onward. Follow the path. Heart pounding, Rowan reached out and pulled the ivy aside, revealing a narrow passageway that led downward into the earth. The walls were lined with smooth, dark stone, and the air that drifted up from below was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and old leaves. She hesitated, her gaze flicking back to the towering silhouette of the willow above her. Was she truly going to do this? Was she going to follow the whispers of an enchanted tree into the unknown? But the longing in her chest, the need to understand, to know, was too strong to resist. Taking a deep breath, she slipped through the opening and began her descent. The passage was steep and narrow, the walls closing in around her as she moved deeper underground. The soft glow she had seen earlier grew brighter, casting eerie shadows that flickered and danced across the stone. Rowan moved carefully, her hand trailing along the rough surface of the wall for balance. The whispers were all around her now, wrapping around her like a shroud, filling her mind with a strange sense of calm. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened up into a small chamber, hidden deep beneath the roots of the willow. The room was circular, the walls lined with thick, twisted roots that glowed faintly in the dim light. In the center of the chamber, resting on a bed of soft, green moss, was a smooth stone pedestal. Rowan's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, her eyes widening in wonder. The pedestal was covered in intricate carvings, runes, and symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, glowing softly in the dim light. She ran her fingers over the markings, tracing the delicate lines and curves. There was something familiar about them, something that tugged at the edges of her memory. And then she saw it. Resting atop the pedestal was a small, silver key. The key was delicate, its surface etched with the same runes that adorned the pedestal. It glinted softly in the faint light, the metal cool and smooth beneath her touch. As Rowan picked it up, she felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a sense of recognition, as if the key had been waiting for her. She turned it over in her hand, studying the fine details. The bow of the key was shaped like a leaf, its veins engraved with tiny curling patterns that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim glow. And there, at the very center, was a small, circular indentation, almost like a symbol, but one she couldn't quite place. The whispers were softer now, fading into the background, but their message was clear. The first clue. Rowan looked around the chamber, her heart racing. The first clue to what? What was the tree trying to tell her? She glanced back at the key, her mind spinning with questions. Why had it led her here? What was the purpose of this strange, hidden place beneath the willow's roots? But even as the questions flooded her mind, she knew that there was only one way to find out. With the key clutched tightly in her hand, Rowan turned and made her way back up the narrow passage, the whispers fading into silence behind her. As she emerged into the clearing once more, the cold night air hit her like a wave, sharp and biting. She looked up at the willow, its branches swaying gently in the breeze, and felt a surge of determination. The tree had shown her the first clue. But there was more to this mystery, more secrets waiting to be uncovered, and she was going to find them. As Rowan stepped away from the clearing, the silver key held tightly in her hand, she felt the whispers of the willow tree fade behind her. The night was still and silent, save for the soft rustle of the wind through the branches overhead. The moon hung high and full above her, casting a pale, ethereal glow over the forest, illuminating the path that stretched out before her. She glanced down at the key, its surface glinting faintly in the moonlight. The small, circular symbol etched into its bow seemed to pulse softly, as if alive with a magic of its own. There was a feeling of anticipation in the air, a quiet hum that vibrated through her bones, urging her onward. With a deep breath, Rowan pocketed the key and began to walk. The forest around her was unlike any she had seen before. The trees were tall and ancient, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like the arms of long-forgotten guardians. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow across the ground. The leaves underfoot were soft, muffling her footsteps as she moved deeper into the woods. As she walked, she noticed that the forest seemed to change around her. The deeper she ventured, the more the air seemed to shimmer with a faint, otherworldly light. The trees, once dark and foreboding, were now bathed in a soft, silvery glow, their bark glistening like polished stone. Tiny, luminous flowers bloomed in the undergrowth, their petals glowing with a soft blue light. They swayed gently as she passed, as if greeting her, their delicate fragrance filling the air. The path wound through the woods in a serpentine curve, leading her further and further into the heart of the forest. Rowan's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. She knew she was following the tree's guidance, that the key in her pocket was meant to unlock something important. But what and where would the path end? As she rounded a bend, the faint sound of running water reached her ears. The soft gurgle of a stream, hidden somewhere among the dense foliage, echoed through the stillness. She followed the sound, weaving her way through the trees, until she came upon a small brook that wound its way through the forest. The water glowed faintly under the moonlight, shimmering with an otherworldly light. Leaning down, Rowan dipped her fingers into the cool, clear water. A shiver ran through her, and for a brief moment, images flashed through her mind. Images of the willow tree, its branches swaying in the wind, of the silver key, glowing softly in the darkness, and of something else, something hidden deep within the forest, waiting to be found. She drew back, her heart pounding. There was magic here, in the very water that flowed through the forest's veins. A magic older than the village, older than the willow, older even than the stories whispered around hearths on cold winter nights. And it was watching her. She straightened, glancing around. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the leaves and branches frozen in place, as if suspended in time. A soft rustling sound caught her attention, and she turned to see a small creature peeking out from behind a tree. It was no larger than a squirrel, with fur that glowed faintly in the darkness, and eyes like tiny, flickering stars. The creature watched her for a moment, its head tilted to one side, before darting out into the open. It scampered up the trunk of a nearby tree, pausing on a low branch to peer down at her. Rowan took a cautious step forward, her gaze locked on the creature. It chirped softly, its eyes glinting in the moonlight, and then, with a flick of its tail, it darted off into the underbrush. Rowan hesitated, then followed. The creature moved quickly, darting between the trees and over the tangled roots, its glowing fur leaving a faint trail of light in its wake. Rowan struggled to keep up, her feet catching on the uneven ground as she pushed through the dense foliage. Branches scratched at her arms, and leaves brushed against her face, but she kept her eyes on the small, glowing form ahead. It led her through a series of twisting paths, each one narrower and darker than the last, until finally they emerged into a small clearing. Rowan stumbled to a halt, breathing hard. The creature paused at the edge of the clearing, turning to look back at her. It chirped once, softly, and then scurried up the trunk of a tall oak, disappearing into the branches above. Rowan took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the clearing. It was small and circular, the ground covered in a thick carpet of moss that glowed faintly in the moonlight. At the center of the clearing stood a large stone pillar, its surface covered in the same intricate runes she had seen on the pedestal beneath the willow tree. The air around it seemed to hum with energy, vibrating softly as if alive. Heart pounding, Rowan stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the pillar. As she approached, she noticed something glinting at its base, a small, delicate object, half buried in the moss. She knelt down, brushing away the dirt and leaves, and gasped softly. It was a pendant. The pendant was shaped like a crescent moon, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen. Tiny, glowing gems were set into the curve of the moon, each one shimmering with a soft, pale light. The sight of it sent a thrill of recognition through her. This was the same symbol that had been etched into the bow of the key, the same circular pattern, delicate and precise. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. The pendant was cool and smooth, the metal warm against her skin. As she held it, the runes on the pillar began to glow, their light pulsing softly in time with the pendant's shimmering glow. Rowan's breath caught in her throat. The pendant and the pillar were connected, linked by the same ancient magic that flowed through the forest. She could feel it, a faint, thrumming energy that resonated deep within her chest, filling her with a sense of anticipation. She glanced back at the pendant, then at the runes on the pillar. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the pendant and pressed it into the circular indentation at the base of the stone. There was a flash of light, a soft, blinding brilliance that filled the clearing, forcing her to squeeze her eyes shut. The ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet, and for a moment, she felt weightless, suspended in a sea of light and shadow. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the light faded. Rowan opened her eyes, blinking against the sudden darkness. The clearing was still, the air filled with the faint scent of moss and earth. But the runes on the pillar were glowing brightly now, their light steady and strong, casting long shadows across the clearing. And in the center of the stone, where the pendant had been placed, a small door had appeared. Rowan stared at it, her heart racing. A door, hidden within the stone, glowing softly in the moonlight. The pendant had been the key, another piece of the puzzle that the willow had led her to. Taking a deep breath, Rowan reached out and pushed the door open. Rowan stood at the entrance of the hidden door, her heart pounding in her chest. The soft glow of the runes around the stone entrance bathed her in a gentle, silver light, casting long, delicate shadows that flickered and danced across the mossy ground. She hesitated, glancing back at the moonlit clearing behind her. The air was still, the forest holding its breath, as if waiting for her to take the next step. With a deep breath, she steeled herself and stepped through the doorway. The space beyond was unlike anything she had imagined. She found herself standing in a narrow corridor, the walls made entirely of smooth, dark stone that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The passage seemed to curve gently, winding deeper into the earth. And as she moved forward, the air around her grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and ancient wood. The further she walked, the more the corridor seemed to change. The stone walls began to give way to thick, twisted roots that protruded from the ground and ceiling, their surfaces slick and glistening as if covered in dew. They pulsed softly, glowing with a faint, ethereal light that seemed to guide her way. The runes she had seen before reappeared here and there, etched into the roots and stones, their delicate lines intertwining with the natural curves of the wood. Rowan's footsteps echoed softly in the stillness, the only sound in the otherwise silent passage. She felt a strange sense of anticipation building within her, a feeling that she was on the cusp of something extraordinary. There was a presence here, deep and powerful, humming in the air around her like a low, thrumming heartbeat. Finally, the passage opened up into a vast underground chamber. Rowan stepped into the open space and gasped softly, her eyes widening in awe. The chamber was enormous, its walls stretching up and outward in a sweeping curve, like the inside of a massive hollowed-out tree. The ceiling arched high above her, tangled with thick roots that twisted and coiled like the tendrils of some great, sleeping creature. The roots glowed softly, their light reflecting off the smooth stone floor, illuminating the chamber in a soft, silvery radiance. But it was the tree at the center of the chamber that stole her breath. A willow, ancient and immense, rose up from the heart of the chamber, its trunk so wide that it seemed to merge with the very walls of the cavern. Its branches spread out in all directions, arching gracefully like the limbs of a great, sleeping giant. The bark was smooth and pale, shimmering faintly under the soft glow of the roots, and the leaves, long, delicate tendrils, hung down like curtains of spun silver, swaying gently in an unseen breeze. Rowan stepped forward, her gaze locked on the willow. It was beautiful, almost otherworldly, and as she approached, she felt the air around her grow warmer, pulsing softly with a quiet, steady rhythm. The leaves above rustled softly, and the low hum that filled the chamber grew louder, resonating deep within her chest. She paused at the base of the tree, staring up at its towering form. There was something etched into the bark, something familiar. The same runes she had seen throughout the forest, spiraling upward like a winding staircase. She reached out, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of the trunk, and a shiver ran through her. The tree was warm to the touch, its bark thrumming softly beneath her fingertips. Welcome, not spoken aloud, but echoed through her mind, filling her thoughts like a gentle breeze. Rowan jerked her hand back, her heart leaping into her throat. She glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing behind her, but the chamber was empty. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The hum grew louder, the leaves above rustling softly. "I am the heart of the willow," the voice murmured, gentle and soothing. "The spirit that dwells within the roots and branches. I have been here since the beginning, watching over the forest, guarding its secrets." Rowan swallowed hard, her gaze darting up to the branches overhead. "But why did you bring me here?" There was a pause, and then the voice returned, softer this time. "Because you listened. Because you heard the whispers in the wind and followed them. Few do these days." Rowan's heart ached at the sadness in the voice. She took a deep breath, her fingers curling against the smooth bark of the willow. "I wanted to understand, to know what the whispers meant." The leaves above rustled softly, almost like a sigh. "You seek knowledge, and for that, I will show you." Before Rowan could respond, the ground beneath her shifted. She stumbled back, her eyes widening as the roots around her began to move, curling and twisting like the limbs of a great, waking beast. The chamber seemed to tremble, the air thickening with a deep, resonant energy that thrummed through the very earth. And then, slowly, the roots parted. A soft, golden light spilled out from within the tree, filling the chamber with a warm, radiant glow. Rowan shielded her eyes, blinking against the brightness, and when she looked again, she saw it. A small, glowing orb nestled deep within the heart of the willow. The orb was smooth and translucent, like a droplet of amber suspended in midair, its surface pulsing gently with a soft golden light. Rowan's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the orb. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, and as she stepped closer, she could feel its warmth washing over her, filling her with a sense of peace and wonder. "This is the heart of the willow?" she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "Yes," the voice murmured, "the source of my magic, the essence of the forest's spirit." Rowan's fingers hovered just inches from the orb, her heart racing. She could feel its energy, gentle and powerful, pulsing softly in time with her own heartbeat. It was like holding a piece of the earth's soul, a fragment of something vast and eternal. "Why did you show me this?" she asked softly. "Because the forest is fading," the voice replied, its tone tinged with sorrow. "The magic that sustains us is dwindling. Fewer and fewer listen to the whispers of the trees. Fewer still follow the path. If something is not done, the forest will wither. The magic will die." Rowan's chest tightened, a pang of grief stabbing through her. "But what can I do?" The leaves rustled softly, and the orb pulsed brighter. "You are the key, the one who listened, the one who heard the call. If you choose to accept, you can carry the magic forward. You can help restore the balance." Rowan stared at the orb, her mind racing. Carry the magic forward. Restore the balance. What did that mean? She was just a scholar, a traveler who had stumbled upon a mystery she barely understood. How could she possibly? But even as the doubts flooded her mind, a quiet resolve began to take root. She had followed the whispers this far. She had listened, and she couldn't turn away now, not when the fate of the forest hung in the balance. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and gently placed her hand against the glowing surface of the orb. Warmth flooded through her, filling her with a sense of purpose and clarity. The magic of the willow flowed into her, wrapping around her heart like a comforting embrace. "You are the key," the voice whispered, soft and strong. "You will be our guide." And then the light enveloped her, and everything went still. Rowan's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she was surrounded by darkness. The soft hum of the willow's voice was gone, replaced by the quiet stillness of the night. She blinked, her vision slowly adjusting, and realized she was standing back in the clearing beneath the enchanted willow. The ancient tree loomed above her, its twisted branches swaying gently in the breeze, casting long, delicate shadows across the ground. She took a deep breath, her heart still pounding from the encounter. The warmth of the willow's magic lingered in her chest, a gentle, pulsing presence that filled her with a sense of peace and purpose. The memory of the glowing orb, the heart of the willow, was vivid in her mind, and as she glanced down, she noticed a faint, golden light radiating from her hands. The glow was soft, almost imperceptible, like the fading light of the setting sun, but it was there, a reminder of the magic she had touched, the magic that now flowed through her veins. She lifted her hands, turning them over slowly, marveling at the way the light shimmered and flickered, casting tiny, dancing patterns across the frost-covered grass. For a moment, she simply stood there, breathing in the cool night air, letting the reality of what had happened sink in. She had spoken to the spirit of the willow, seen the heart of the forest, felt its magic fill her soul. And now she carried that magic within her. Rowan closed her eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. The whispers of the willow had shown her a glimpse of something vast and eternal, a world beyond the mundane, a world where the trees spoke and the earth thrummed with ancient power, and she had been chosen to protect it. But what did that mean? What would it require of her? A soft, rustling sound drew her attention, and she turned to see the willow's branches swaying gently, as if bidding her farewell. The presence of the tree, the spirit that had spoken to her, was still there, but it was fainter now, more distant. She could feel it watching her, its gaze warm and gentle, but she knew that the time for questions had passed. The answers she sought would not be found here. Taking a deep breath, Rowan bowed her head to the willow, a gesture of respect and gratitude. Then, with a final glance at the towering tree, she turned and began to walk back toward the village. The path through the forest was quiet, the air crisp and cold against her skin. The moonlight filtered through the branches overhead, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow across the ground. As she walked, she felt the forest around her shift and change. The trees seemed to stand taller, their branches reaching upward like the outstretched arms of a welcoming host. The leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and she could almost hear the faint, echoing murmur of voices drifting through the air. The forest was alive, truly, deeply alive. And for the first time, Rowan could feel its heartbeat, a steady, pulsing rhythm that thrummed through the earth beneath her feet, resonating with the magic that now flowed through her veins. She moved slowly, savoring the sensation, her steps light and careful. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of moonlight seemed to carry a deeper meaning now, as if the entire forest were speaking to her in a language she was only just beginning to understand. The trees whispered softly as she passed, their branches swaying gently as if in greeting, and she felt a sense of connection, a bond that tied her to the very soul of the woods. It was a feeling of belonging, of being part of something greater than herself, and it filled her with a quiet, radiant joy. By the time she emerged from the forest, the first light of dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of rose and gold. The village of Evermoor lay spread out before her, its rooftops dusted with frost, the narrow cobbled streets still shrouded in the pale mist of early morning. Smoke rose lazily from the chimneys, curling upward into the clear, crisp air, and the faint sound of a rooster crowing echoed through the stillness. Rowan paused at the edge of the woods, her gaze drifting over the familiar sight of the village. It looked the same as it always had, quiet, peaceful, untouched by the magic she had witnessed. But to her, it felt different, smaller somehow, as if she were standing on the threshold of two worlds, the mundane and the magical, and she wasn't quite sure where she belonged. But she knew one thing for certain: she could never go back to the way things were before. The magic of the willow, the essence of the forest, had changed her, reshaped her. And though the villagers might not see it, she carried that change within her, like a tiny spark of light hidden deep within her chest. It was a part of her now, a part that would never fade, no matter how far she traveled from the willow's roots. Taking a deep breath, Rowan stepped out onto the cobbled street, her boots crunching softly on the frost-covered stones. The village was just beginning to wake, the faint murmur of voices drifting from the windows of the small, ivy-covered houses. She could see a few figures moving about. The baker stoking the fire in his oven, the blacksmith wiping the morning dew from his tools. Ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. And yet, as she passed by, she noticed a few of them glancing her way, their eyes lingering on her a moment longer than usual. There was something in their gazes, a flicker of curiosity, of recognition, that made her heart quicken. Could they see it too? Could they sense the magic that hummed softly beneath her skin? Rowan offered a small, hesitant smile to an elderly woman sweeping the steps of her cottage. The woman paused, her gaze narrowing slightly as if studying her, and then slowly, she smiled back. It was a simple gesture, but it filled Rowan with a warmth that spread through her chest, easing the lingering uncertainty. She straightened, lifting her head a little higher, and continued down the street. As she walked, she felt a quiet resolve settle over her. The forest had entrusted her with its magic, its secrets. It had chosen her to be its guardian, its voice in a world that was rapidly forgetting the whispers of the trees. And she would not turn away from that responsibility. She didn't know what the future held, what paths the willow's guidance would lead her down. But she knew one thing. She would listen. She would be the one who heard the call, who followed the whispers, who protected the magic of the woods. And perhaps, in time, she would find a way to share that magic with the world. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its warm, golden light over the village, Rowan walked on, the soft hum of the willow's magic singing in her heart.